I want to again say welcome to everyone in this house, everyone viewing online today. Thank you for the gift of your time. And I am excited to tell you about something that has been in the works for well over 6 months now. If you've been around NorthField since our days started in the school and then we moved into the building, I think it's right about 9 or 10 years. I'm going to have to get my mind together and think about that. But we used to do, and it's been a couple of years since we've done one, but we did 40-day spiritual growth journeys is what we called them. The first one came from a church in California. It was 40 days of purpose. Then we did 40 days of prayer. We've done 40 days in the Word. We've done 40 days on mission. We've done 40 days of faith, 40 days of community. And God, I think, has used every one of those 40-day spiritual journeys to shape who we are as a family. And that number 40, I hope it's not lost on you that the number 40 is all throughout Scripture, that there is something about doing something for 40 days. I'm going to have a little audience participation, and hopefully y'all will get stronger as we go through this, because the answer to the question is going to be obvious and representative, and so I'm going to ask you to say it louder each time. It rained for how many days and nights when God was making a new world? 40. When Moses went up on the mountain to get the 10 Commandments, how long did he stay? When the spies went to discover the promised land, how long did they scout it out? When Jonah went to Nineveh to preach the word to this incredible city that was turning away from him, how long did he preach? Y'all is going down. We got to get back up. Say it with me. 40. Keep the energy up here. When Jesus fasted and prayed before he began his ministry, how many days did he fast and pray? 40. When after the resurrection, and Jesus spent how many days between the resurrection, his ascension into heaven? It says encouraging his followers. 40. Because Jesus knew something long before science figured it out. Almost every book that you can find on forming habits says if you will do something for about 40 days, that if you will do something consistently for about a 6-week period of time, that it will become ingrained in you. It is no wonder that the God who formed us, who knew all of that before psychologists figured it out, used 40 days as a season of preparation, a season of starting over, a season of new beginnings, and sometimes even a season of testing for us. And we're about to step into another 40-day journey. This one is called Make Room. It is actually one that we have written ourselves, called 40 Days of Hospitality. Most of you know Trent Forrest, our former student pastor, who's now gone into a role of small groups and spiritual growth, has been working hard developing the curriculum that we're going to use, and we're going to try to discover this word hospitality. When you hear the word hospitality, if you are like me, most often I think of having a meal with someone or welcoming someone into my home. But that's not really, that's part of, but that is not really the total biblical picture of hospitality. It's so much bigger than that. It's not just opening our homes, it's opening our lives. It's not just saying welcome for this phase of whatever I'm going through. Maybe it's a dinner one night or a breakfast one morning. It's saying I'm opening my schedule to you. It's making room for God to work not only through us, but to impact others through what he does through us. Over these 40 days, we're going to take a journey. We're going to take a journey that starts way back in the beginning in the book of Genesis, and that story is going to end in the book of Revelation. It's going to start with that home that God made for us in the very beginning in the garden, where he offered hospitality to each of us. The place where, if you read, I think Genesis 3:8, it says, we heard God walking in the cool of the garden the way it was meant to be. And then the hospitality that God shows us on the other end, when we get to the other side, where we've got a home that he has prepared for us. Hospitality is all throughout the pages of Scripture. And each week you're going to have 2 opportunities. I call it to grow. One is right here in this setting where you will hear messages. But number 2 is in a life group. And I would like to say, if you are not in a life group for this, it is one time that we are going to push you and encourage you and do everything we can to get you to sign up for a life group. Because here's the deal. 50% of what we talk about will only be talked about in life group. The sermon, and I would say this, if you're just coming here, this is the low bar. It's the low bar because you just got to come in and sit down, and if you can stay awake, I have told the coffee shop to put extra caffeine into all of your stuff to kind of keep you alert there. And, it is really the low, because you can't talk back to me. Well, you could, but it would be awkward because I wouldn't hear you and I can't hear, and it would just get confusing and all that. But the life group is where half the content is going to be, and it's actually where we're going to practice and even talk about what it means to live out hospitality, to share stories together, and to walk this way together. So our prayer is that for the next 6 weeks, everybody who hasn't been in a life group will join one, which means if that happens, there will be well over 600 or 700 people that join a life group. The actual series, I'm going to kick off the series on October 12th, which is how many weeks from today? Everybody say 2, which gives me how many weeks to finish the book of Acts? Y'all pray hard because we're going to get there. And the actual, though, 40-day journey is going to begin the week after that, October 19th, because we didn't want to hit that fall break week when I know a lot of people will be traveling. If you have been hesitant to join the small group, I would say this is your time to jump in, because a lot of times the hesitancy I hear is, well, what if I don't like it? Well, what if I don't like it? Well, this has a beginning and an ending point. So if you get in a group and you don't like if you can just endure it for 6 weeks, you'll be out on the other end in no time, and you can just do smooth sailing. You can sign up 3 easy ways. One is you can scan or rescan the QR code on the seat back in front of you and just refill out that connection card. Scroll down just a bit and you will see 40 days of hospitality, and one of the options is join a group. If you are at home, you can reach that connection card by going to the Connect tab on our NorthField app or website and do the same thing. Another way, whether you're in the house or at home, that you can sign up is go to the Events tab, and it's one that probably you're familiar with because almost everything we do flows from there. It is the very first room. It says Make Room. If you click it, you'll see an option that says Join a Group. That won't actually put you in a group, but it will put you on the list where we're going to call you and find out more about your situation and try to get you in just the right group. And then for everyone in the house, if you walked in and you can walk out today, Trent is going to be right over here to your left as you go out these doors. You can walk right over there to him and talk to him about what it would be like to join a group. But that's kind of half one, half two is this. You know what it's going to take to make this spiritual growth campaign a success? Host. Because if we come through, and I'm counting on it, you're not in a group, you'll try one out for at least 6 weeks, that means that we need a lot more people to be a host. And a host isn't hard. A host doesn't mean you have to be a biblical expert. We took host from Rick Warren, how he used to describe host. The H simply stands for, do you have a heart for people? If you have a heart for people, you can be a host. The O stands for open your home. And get this, anymore it doesn't have to be a home. Linda and I have hosted a group at a park before. We've hosted a group in our backyard before. We've actually even had times where we've met at Starbucks or met at some other places where there have been a small group of people that met. It doesn't mean that you got 20 people in your home. Sometimes it's just 5 or 6. Sometimes it is. If you have a larger place, it's more. So that O is open home. S is serve a snack. And get this, if you go to somewhere where there's a restaurant, they will serve a snack for you. All you got to do is give them the menu and say, here, y'all order. I hope you got money, but y'all order what you, I used to hear somebody used to say, everybody sits on their own bucket. So, that can be a thing too. But anyway, all of those things is what hosting means. And maybe I thought I would give you some ideas. Maybe you're in a group right now. But for that 6-week period, you would be willing to step out of your group and host another group. We need you. Maybe you're in a group and you will do. There have been times in our life, not a lot, but there have been times when Linda and I have hosted 2 groups when we have done some of these campaigns. We stayed in the group that we were in, but we said, hey, for this period of time, we will do another one. If ours met on Sunday, we might say, well, we'll do one on Tuesday or we'll do one on Friday. Because, it has a beginning and it has an ending point as well. Or maybe you've been on the fence about hosting, and this is a time where you'll say, you know what, I'm going to try it. I'm going to trust God that he's going to do something big and I'm going to try it. So I think because a lot of people in our world right now are hungry and they're searching for something, I'm thinking that we're going to have a lot of people who sign up. So I'm hoping that you will do that. How can you sign up to be a host? Good news is it's the same way you sign up to be a member of a group. You just go back, scan or rescan that QR code on the seat back in front of you, scroll down, and instead of clicking join a group, click I'll host a group. And again, that won't automatically put you there, but it will allow you to talk to Trent or talk to someone on our staff about what that looks like. You can go to the events tab, whether you're at home or in the house. You can click that same make room icon. And the second option there, besides join a group, is host a group. And then as always, you can walk right out the back doors if you're in the house today, and you can talk to Trent. I think that God, with this 40-day series, will do what he has done in our other 40-day series that could be a defining moment for people to dive back into the Word and to look, starting with Genesis all the way to Revelation, what was God doing in showing hospitality to us, to invite us into his presence? And then how can we do that for the people around us? So join a group, step out, host a group, but whatever you do, don't miss it. As I say, if you do, you're only going to miss it once, and that will be for the rest of your life, and I don't want that to happen to you. So sign up today. Hey, since we've got just a little bit of time, and I'm on a time frame between this week and next week to get through, we're going to speed date the last half of 27 and chapter 28. I had a girl come up to me and gave me a compliment after a second. She goes, I think you can talk as fast as my teacher can. And I said, well, you've had practice keeping up then, haven't you? So last week when we ended in Acts chapter 27, Paul and his companions were in the middle of a storm. Luke is writing the story, and Luke in verse 20 of chapter 27 says this: when neither the sun nor the stars had appeared for many days and the storm continued raging, we finally gave up, he says, all hope of being saved. And here's the question we left you with last week. What promise do you hold on to? What promise of God keeps you anchored in the middle of the storm? What is it that you hold on to? Because that's where we are in Acts 27. We're going to pick back up. We're going to talk about those promises. And to get you where we were going, if you remember a few weeks ago, Paul has a trial before King Agrippa. That trial doesn't go so well. Nobody wants to make a decision. So they decide, yes, they're going to send Paul to Rome. They put him on a boat headed to Rome. And Luke and Aristarchus are traveling with him. At first, the voyage seems routine, but a few days in, when they get to the island of Crete, Luke warns them that sailing season is over. Paul looks to the people because Paul is traveling as a prisoner. He's not a paid passenger. He is going free, but he is a prisoner of Rome going, and he has a guard. He looks to his guards and he says, this is going to be disastrous if we continue. But as we read last week, the pilot of the boat, the captain, and the guards, they listen to the pilot who says, we need to go somewhere else where it's safer. And at first, it looked like to be the thing to do, because Luke says when they set sail from Crete that the winds were blowing gently and it was just a Mediterranean cruise at that point. But then a storm came up that is particular to the Mediterranean Sea. In fact, it has a name, something like Euclanahan or something like that, but it is particular to the Mediterranean Sea. It's a lot like a hurricane can be out in the ocean, but it's on a sea. And it says that the storm was so severe that it drove them so far off course. And Paul says it's going to be disastrous. The sailors did everything they knew to save themselves. They secured the lifeboats. They throw the cargo overboard. 3 days later, they throw the tackle overboard. If you read the description, there's so much of putting the anchors in, taking the anchors out, trying to do whatever they can to make the boat secure, and nothing has worked. And then when you add to that the fact that they don't have any of their normal ways of navigation, that for 2 weeks, as we're going to see, they haven't seen the stars and they haven't seen the moon, things that they would normally have used to find out where they are. In fact, if you remember from last week, one of the places that it mentioned that they thought they might run aground was Sataris, I think is how you say that. You know where that is? That's in Africa. That's in Africa. They have been so long drifting that they think that this ship might have drifted all the way to the coast of Africa. Well, anyway, none of that has changed. And Luke finally writes, we gave up all hope of being lost. And maybe that describes the situation in your life. You fought for your marriage and you fought, but it ended. You had a job, layoffs, you worked hard, stayed late, came in early. Or maybe it was a second job to help provide for your family and it was all you could do to kind of stay afloat. Maybe it was an addiction, something that you've tried, and maybe you got to the place where Luke is, where he looks and just says, we gave up all hope of being lost. What is it that you hold on to in moments where you feel that way? In moments where it feels like you're going under? Because what Paul had in that moment is, I think, what we have today. And it wasn't a tangible, as we said last week, Jesus on board. It was a promise. a promise that you're going to get to the other side. For Paul, it was a promise that you will testify about me in Rome. To the disciples in Mark chapter 4, it was a promise that we're going to get to the other side. And for you and for me, I think we have the promise that Jesus left this earth with. I will be with you always, even to the ends of this world. But that can often look a bit differently than we think. So, as we pick up in the story today, what we're going to see is what happens in the middle of a storm when one person, if you don't think one person can make a difference, I want you to see what the faith of one person does during the middle of this storm. So let's continue in Acts chapter 27, starting in verse 21. After they had gone a long time without food, you know why they went a long time without food? Because they are seasick. I'm going to tell you, they are going to. Paul stood up before them and said, "Men, you should have taken my advice not to sail from Crete." Now, I'll tell you, that is the ultimate "I told you so" moment, isn't it? Do any of you live with anybody who has said that before? Well, if you had done this, things might have worked out a bit better. He says, "Then you would have spared yourselves this damage and loss. But now I urge you to keep up your courage, because not one of you will be lost. Only the ship will be destroyed. Last night, an angel of the God to whom I belong and to whom I serve stood beside me and said, 'Do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand trial before Caesar. And God has graciously given you the lives of all who sail with you. So keep up your courage, men, for I have faith in God that it will happen just as he told me. Nevertheless,'" this storm is going to happen. "I have faith in God. Nevertheless, this ship has got to get to sea." He says, "We must run aground on some island because this ship is falling apart." Notice, after days of despair, after days of what seems hopelessness, Paul looks up. One guy stands up in the middle. Luke has already said, we gave up. We've given up all hope. But Paul says, well, I'm not a part of that we. I've not given up hope. Not one of you will be lost. The ship is going to be destroyed, but not you. And I know this, he says, because an angel of the Lord stood by me in the night, the angel of the Lord to whom I belong, to whom I serve. And he said, "Do not be afraid, Paul. You're going to stand trial before Caesar." So to Paul, that meant you're going to get to Rome. This thing is not going to be the end of you. And it's not all that different from what Jesus told the disciples in Mark 4. You're going to go to the other side. And did you notice what else God said in verse 24? This angel that appeared, he said, look at these words. "God has graciously given you the lives of all who sail with you, Paul." That meant that Paul's promise wasn't just about Paul, wasn't it? That God was going to save everybody on that ship because one guy had faith. And isn't that how it works in our life today? As you look around, when we live out the promises of God, when we walk by faith in the middle of the storm, it doesn't just affect us, it affects the people around us. I would say this to you, that your greatest testimony to Jesus and how he works in your life will not be when things are going well in your life. It just won't be. Your greatest testimony will be how you act and how you cling to the promises of God when things are falling apart. It's easy to thank God when the money is in the bank account and the job is going well and you have no things and you can hop on and do and go and all. It's easy, you know. And sometimes in those moments, would you not agree that if we're not careful, those are the moments when we actually think of God the least? When do we think of him the most? When trials come. When things happen, when we begin to reach out. Paul to the Philippian church, he would urge them this. He looked and he said, "I want you to continue to shine like stars in the universe, because against a background of darkness," he says, "when you stand up for the light of God, wow, can it change people's lives?" And really, that's exactly what Make Room is all about. When we talk about this 40-day campaign, it is about saying not only in the good times in our lives, because if we get a lot of people and a lot of you do what I'm asking you to do and sign up to be in a group, there's some of you who are going through a storm and you're going to be in a group where you'll hopefully have people to walk with you through that storm. It's about making room for people in such a way it creates a space. The difference is not the promise that Paul received to get to Rome or that the disciples received to get to the other side. It's how we respond to the promise. Because in Mark, if you notice, they responded in fear. In Acts, they all responded in fear except for one guy, Paul, who stands up and speaks in faith. And in the middle of that storm, Paul does the very thing I think that's difficult for us to do during a storm. He doesn't deny that God is the storm. What he does is declare his faith in the storm. He doesn't go out and say, well, I can see how you think God isn't with us. He doesn't go out and look to the crowd and say, well, why are you believing in this God? Because if you did, this wouldn't have happened. What he does is look at these people right in the middle of the storm, and he declares his faith, and he says, really, the storm doesn't negate faith in your life. It doesn't negate that there's a God. Maybe it proves there is. Let's read on Acts chapter 27, verse 27. On the 14th night, they're going 14 days, they've been going through this. We were still being driven across the Adriatic Sea when about midnight the sailors sensed they were approaching land. They took soundings and found that the water was 120 feet deep. A short time later, they took soundings again and found it was 90 feet deep. I was looking at how boats do it today. Many of you might have a boat that has an instrument panel that shows the depth of the water from where you're in. Well, when I was looking at it, some boats have these little pinging things on the bottom where it can kind of measure whether it's a sound or whether it's a light and when it stops and how deep the thing is. That's really what they're doing here, but a method that would have worked for them because they didn't have a pinger or all of those things that we have today. They had rope, and so they would lower the rope and they would put a small metal but heavy object on the end of it, and they would let it down, and if it never hit bottom, they would know that it's deeper than what their rope is. But evidently the rope was at least 120 feet deep because they put something on the end of it. They lower it, they found out that the shore or that the bottom of the sea is just 120 feet deep. They do it again in just a little bit and they find it's 90 feet deep, and what they realize is that they are headed towards some shore. They don't know where it is, but they're headed towards shore. They feared, verse 29, that we would be dashed against the rocks, so they dropped 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for daylight. They didn't want the boat to crash against the shore in the night where they couldn't see. So they drop some anchors and they hope the boat will stay there and make it, and they're praying for morning. In verse 30, in an attempt to escape from the ship, the sailors let the lifeboat down into the sea, pretending they were going to lower some anchors from the bow. Then Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, unless these men stay with the ship, you cannot be saved. So the soldiers cut the ropes that held the lifeboat and let it drift away. Just before dawn, Paul urged them all to eat. For the last 14 days, he said, you have been in constant suspense and you have gone without food. You haven't eaten anything. Now I urge you to take some food. You need it to survive. Not one of you will lose a hair from his head. After he said this, he took some bread and gave thanks to God in front of them all. He broke it and he began to eat. They were all encouraged and ate some food themselves. Altogether, there were 276 of us, Luke says, on board. When they had eaten as much as they wanted, they lightened the ship by throwing the grain into the sea. They are 2 weeks into this storm. If you notice, some of the sailors who would have depended on the lifeboat think, well, we're going to take this lifeboat that we rescued and we're going to slip it off the back. And maybe they think because in their mind, this big ship is going to wreck and we're going to get in this little boat. But Paul sees what they're doing. He warns the centurion. He says, unless these men stay with the ship, excuse me, he says, you cannot be saved. But then look at verse 32 again. So the soldiers cut the ropes that held the lifeboat and let it drift away. As I thought the past couple of weeks and leading up to this message today, I thought that point was worth pausing on. What is a lifeboat to any ship? It's your backup plan, isn't it? It's the thing you count on to be there, that if the thing you're counting on not to sink, sinks. It's the escape hatch. It's their safety net. It represented the thing that they trusted could save them if the ship failed. And these guards must have had a lot, because these guards, all they have is a vision from Paul that God showed up in the night and said something to him. And all of a sudden, these guards are willing to cut away the very thing that all their life they were taught, that if the ship wrecks, at least we have this to go by. But when I'm honest with myself, we all have lifeboats, don't we? We all have lifeboats that we hold on to. They may not be out in the middle of an ocean, but something that we keep tied close to us just in case. Well, in case God doesn't come through the way we wanted him to come through. Maybe it's money that we think will buy our security. Maybe it's a relationship that we cling to thinking, well, if that relationship lasts, then I'll be okay. Maybe it's a career. Maybe it's a position of power. Maybe it's that false sense of control that we feel that if we can just hold on to whatever it is, we convince ourselves that we're the ones running the show. But here's the truth. If I fully surrender to Jesus, do you know what by definition that means? Then I have to fully unsurrender everything that is not of Jesus. I know that unsurrender is not even a word. I wrote it and I tried to get Microsoft Word to kind of quit underlining it for me when I realized, well, that's not even a word, Tom. You just kind of made that word up. But I think you know what I mean, don't you? Maybe Microsoft would like me to better phrase it. If I'm going to fully surrender my life to Jesus Christ, the only way to fully do that is to begin to let go of the things that are not of God and to let them drift away. It's the process of loosening my grip on my backup plan, because there comes a time in your life when the ropes get cut. There comes a time in your life when whether it's just the way the world goes because we are in a world that's full of sin, or maybe even, I love what Priscilla Shire said one time. She said, I don't believe that God makes everything happen, but everything that happens is filtered through the lens of His providence and the lens of His guidance. And as scary as it feels to cut away some things, sometimes maybe it's actually the most secure place we can be. Because I'm not sure that we ever really learn to rely on God when we got a backup plan to hold on to. The sailors in Acts 27 had already thrown the cargo overboard. 3 days later, they throw the tackle overboard. They've used all the ropes they have to try to hold the boat together that's falling apart. But when the storm is raging, they weren't ready to let go of the one last thing that they thought would save them, the lifeboat, their backup plan. They're just in case. But Paul looks to them and he says, unless they stay with the ship, speaking to the centurion, you cannot be saved. And the soldiers go and they do something that took incredible faith in Paul in that moment, a prisoner. Do you see God's providence in there? Why would they even listen to a prisoner? And the soldiers cut the ropes away and they let the lifeboat drift away. And maybe that seems scary. But let me ask you this question. What's the lifeboat you hold on to just in case? Because I would imagine we all have them. What's the backup plan that you keep your rope tied to just in case? And trying to think of an example over the last couple of weeks, the one that kept coming to my mind was the example of the Titanic. Do you realize some of the richest people in the world were on the Titanic when it went down? Some of the most powerful people in the world were on the Titanic when it went down. There were real estate tycoons. There were entrepreneurs. Their wealth was enormous. Some people who have studied the Titanic believe that the amount of money that just the people in first class had at their disposal at that time was over $500 million. One man alone, worth over $82 million, sat in first class. But on that cold April night, there was no amount of money, there was no amount of power or position that could keep that ship from going down. John Jacob Astor, traveling in first class, couldn't outrun the wreck. Richest man on board, some believe to be even the most powerful man on board. Ironic, isn't it? That those things that often make us feel secure, money, position, power, status, it can all be stripped away in a night. Storms don't. Maybe that's a question. Maybe before I give you the answer, maybe I'll ask you, what is the one question that a storm doesn't ask when it comes your way? It doesn't ask what amount of money's in your bank account, does it? Doesn't ask what position you hold at the company, and doesn't ask what status you have in the organization. What storms do when they come your way is show what you've put your faith in up to that point. So maybe the question Acts 27 calls me to ask is, what's the lifeboat you're holding on to? The lifeboat where you say, well, I got to save, I got to keep, I got to make sure this. Maybe it's a relationship. Well, I can't let go of that. I got to fight and fight and fight to keep that relationship. You know what I've noticed through my very limited, I don't even really call it counseling, I call it talking to. When I have a man and a woman sit in front of me and one of them says, I'm fighting, and they're chasing. What I've realized is the more they chase, the more the other person runs. That there comes a place where you got to get to the point where you got to say, I've done everything I can do. I'm going to put this in God's hand and I'm going to trust that He is enough in this moment. Because the truth is this, like the Titanic, every single lifeboat we have will eventually sink. The Hebrew writer says that one day God is going to shake the world and everything not founded in Jesus Christ will fall. Everything. There will not be a single position of power left on this earth. In fact, every knee will bow to Jesus Christ, and every tongue will proclaim that Jesus Christ is Lord. And no amount of money, no amount of position, no amount of power can stop that from happening. And the sailors, in cutting the rope, they were all of a sudden putting their faith in a man who said, I serve a God. And did you notice that God is going to save them all through that? I remember when our son Aaron was born, I've told you stories before about Alana when she came along, and I thought maybe I'd tell you one about Aaron. He was born 2 months early, weighed 3 pounds, 14 ounces, if I remember correctly, but it was a hard delivery. It wasn't a hard delivery for me. It was a hard delivery for my sweet wife down here. He got stuck in the birth canal, and Linda, in the process of that, passed out. The doctor there, all of a sudden, there were a team of people because we watched his heart rate going down on the monitor. We watched every sign that said he was alive begin to go away. And there he is stuck. And the doctor pulls in I don't know what you call them, a suction device that they can put on the baby's head and try to pull them out. That has a name, but I don't know what it is. And evidently the ones there went up to 40 pounds of pressure because I remember Dr. Conda saying 20 pounds, 25 pounds, 30 pounds, 35 pounds. And I remember distinctly in that room, and because you know what I had done just a few minutes earlier? I laid the hamburger I was holding behind the door. I mean, the storm came up fast. I put that down and all of these people are around. She gets to 40 pounds of pressure on our baby's head. And then she gets that machine, she pulls it off, she pushes it aside, and she orders another one. And then like an instant, they have another one in there, but she does the very same thing. And then all of a sudden, almost in the blink of an eye, she just begins to cut. She gets forceps, and they just pull him out. And we had a glimpse, in a moment, and they've taken him away. And a few hours later, when we finally did get to see him, he looked like he had been beaten up. His head had blood up here of it. And I think one of the sweet nurses at the hospital, trying to make us feel comfortable, she goes, what were y'all doing when she goes into labor? Like, she thought we must have done something to go into labor. And I'm like, and here it's true confessions. I'm not saying this is right or wrong. I'm just saying this is what we were doing. I said, we were watching Knots Landing. And I don't know if y'all remember, spinoff of Dallas, Knots Landing. If you're young out there and you don't remember, go up and look at Abby Ewing. I thought, well, that's what we were doing. We were watching Knots Landing. And Abby Ewing had the purplest eyeshadow of, I just remember that from my younger, I'm going back 35 years now. And what I remember most is that over the coming weeks, all that blood that was at the top of Aaron's head just began to seep down like this. And I remember calling him, I said, you look like you could be on Knots Landing, the boy. And all this blood just began to go from here. But that started what would be a little over a month in ICU of the NICU of wondering and doubting and trying not to doubt and trying to trust. But you know what I realized in that moment? There was no earthly lifeboat we had to hold on to that could help us. They could help us in the sense that people could encourage and people could come around you and people could pray. But let me tell you, money, which is what so many people often try to use as their lifeboat, money couldn't fix it. Work couldn't fix it. It didn't matter whether I cleaned the company I worked for or whether I ran whatever it was, the top of it. Even the people who loved us couldn't carry the weight of what we were feeling. There was only one thing we had. It was a promise that we would make it to the other side. And here's the deal. We didn't know what the other side looked like. We didn't know if the other side looked like a life with Aaron or a life without Aaron. And it was in those days, I think, of trying to trust that I was given, somebody on a Sunday morning handed me the words of it's an old song, but it's an also meaningful song. The words go like this: lean on me when you have no strength to stand. When you feel you're going under, hold tighter to my hand. Lean on me when your heart begins to bleed. For when you come to the place where I'm all you have, you'll find I'm all you need. And that's where they are in Acts chapter 27. The ropes have been cut. They've drifted away, the lifeboats. Every backup plan on board is gone. And the men have given up everything they thought would have saved them. And maybe where we need to kind of wrap up today is in this. Paul does something incredible in that moment. It says that he stands in front of the ship, in front of them all. He takes a piece of bread and he breaks it and he gives thanks. And I don't really think in that moment they're talking about communion, but aren't those words reminiscent of communion? Because there's another storm that happened just several, maybe 30 years before this storm that happened when Jesus had looked at his disciples. It was a week that had started with such promise, and he looks at them and he says, you need to know something. I'm going to be handed over. I'm going to be arrested. I'm going to be tried, and I'm going to be put to death. And in that upper room, they're trying to figure out what in the world does that mean and how could that happen? And if that were the only storm, that's enough, isn't it, to be told that the one you followed is going to be taken out, the one you thought was going to be the leader who was going to overcome Rome, that Rome, it looks like, is going to overcome him tonight. But what about the next few days? What they could have never have imagined, that he would be killed in the most cruelest of ways, and they spend 3 days wondering, doubting. In the middle of all of that, in that night when they have a storm that they're in and they have a storm that is about to get worse, what does Jesus do? He does the same thing that Paul did right here in the middle of that storm. It says he gave thanks for the bread and he broke it and he gave it to them. And he reminded them of something. The same thing that you were reminded of in communion this morning. That we have the presence of the body of Christ living in us. Our hope is not in the storm. Our hope is in the one who lives on the inside of us. And Paul does the same thing. He takes some bread, he breaks it, and it just reminded me, if you look at the story of the upper room, do you remember after they broke the bread what Luke says that they did? That they sang a hymn. And then they went out to the Mount of Olives. And maybe it reminds me that gratitude and thanks to God is not something I do when the storm is over. Maybe gratitude and thanks to God is a survival strategy that helps me get through the storm. That instead of running from him, that maybe the best thing I can do is run towards him. In the moment here, if you were to go home and read, and I hope you will, the last 3 or 4 verses in chapter 27 will end. They do, morning comes, the sea is still raging. It says they hoist the sail one last time. They catch a little bit of wind, and as the sail hits the shore, it doesn't go all the way, it gets stuck. It says that the guards all of a sudden realize that these prisoners might escape, so they take out their swords. They're going to kill Paul, and they're going to kill the prisoners who are there. But the centurion who was over Paul, Julius, that we met last week, he tells the guards, put your swords away, which is a very risky thing for him to do, because Rome had a law. If you were a guard and you let one of your prisoners escape, when you paid for it with your life, they put their lives on the line. How? How but by the providence of God does that even happen in the middle of a storm? Well, they make it through, and the captain of the boat, he looks over, he says, everybody who can swim, just jump out and swim as hard as you can and get to shore. And then he says, everybody else, find something, find the board, find the top of the piano, I don't know, whatever it is that you can find, that you can surf to shore on, or that you can drift to shore with. And Luke says, and all 276 of us made it, just like Jesus or Paul had said that Jesus had told them. So if I take something away from Acts 27, here's what it is. Sometimes God doesn't save us from the wreck. I wish I could tell you that this morning, that you'll never be in a wreck, that you'll never be in a storm. Sometimes he doesn't save us from the wreck, but what he does is walk with us through the wreck. As we ended last week, he looks at David when David says, even when the biggest wreck I can think of comes along and it's my time on this earth to be over, he says, God will walk with me through the valley of the shadow of death. Maybe the storm you're in right now, maybe it's not evidence that God has abandoned you. Maybe it's the very place he intends to raise you up. That's what God has done with storms all throughout the centuries. I think of Joseph, from a slave to the leader in his land. I think of Moses, from a slave to a deliverer. I think of his son, from a sacrifice to a savior. And I think of Paul right here, from a prisoner to a leader in the storm. So here's the question. What is it that God wants you to hold on to in the storm. I think it's a promise. It's a promise that you and I are going to make it to the other side. I don't know what's going to happen in between the storm and the other side, but there is one promise that stands sure. God will never leave us. He will never forsake us. And when the hardest thing comes, He will take us by the hand and He will walk with us through the other side. We'll end the story of Paul and his amazing life next week. Father, I thank you for an incredible book that we've been in. I thank you for an incredible journey that ends where we will all be at some point in our life in a storm, with this huge, incredible reminder that in this life, maybe we're not always saved from the wreckage, but Father, that you walk with us through that you give us a promise to hold on to. Father, that a world that started in one garden with a home that was just right and just perfect and made to last forever will indeed end in a home that is perfect and just right and that will last forever. We cling to that. We thank you for that. And we put our anchor in that hope. And all of us at NorthField, in the mighty name of Jesus, say, amen.